asked yourself this question, what kind of spice am I? What kind of spice am I? Or maybe you might ask it of someone else. Say to them, "Yeah, what kind of spice am I? Are you cinnamon, sweet and spicy? Are you garlic, strong, necessary? What would spaghetti sauce be without a little bit of garlic? The bane of vampires, but off-putting. Are you pepper? Does a little too much of you make people sneeze? Are you curry? A little exotic, a mixture. Never the same thing twice. You know, there's no real formula for curry. It's mixed to taste. Are you salt? A preservative. What kind of seasoning are you? Or have you asked yourself, what kind of light am I? Am I a bright light that shines boldly? Or am I a dim light, barely worth the electricity expended? What kind of seasoning, what kind of light are you? We are, during the month of February, looking at 4 sections of the Sermon on the Mount. Yeah, that's fine. Last week we looked at the Beatitudes. And we said that the word blessed in the Beatitudes, many scholars are now saying that that word can be translated empowered. So that the hearers of the words of the Beatitudes, the hearers of Jesus' time, the people who were dominated by the Romans, were able to know that in God's kingdom they were empowered. And that they were empowered because they were part of God's kingdom, even if they did not feel empowered. Today, we look at a section that has the defining you statements. Statements that tell the hearers and us what God's expectations are of us and what our role is in the kingdom. You are, says Jesus. Now, we've heard that phrase, you are, in relation to other things in life. At the end of the marriage ceremony, I always say, by the power invested in me as an ordained minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ and through the state of Ohio, I now pronounce that you are husband and wife. 34 years ago, a church official said to me, you are now an ordained minister. A few years earlier, there was a colonel at the end of our advanced individual training graduating class said to us all, you are soldiers today. We might just say to someone, you are handsome, you are beautiful, you are talented, or we might say you are crazy, you are a screw-up, you are a failure, you are lazy, you are lower than low. We might say that, but we shouldn't. You language defines us. We react to you language, often defining ourselves by what the you language describes, particularly if that you language is negative. Now, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus was deliberately defining the role of his followers in the world, and he is doing it intentionally so there is no ambiguity about who his followers were. You, meaning us, are the salt of the earth. You, meaning us, are the light of the world. What does it mean to be salt and light? Well, to answer that question, we have to get in touch with what it meant to be salt in the first century world. You know, today we're trying to avoid salt, most of us. We want a low sodium world. We try to buy things that don't have as much salt in them. But that wasn't the problem in the first century world. Salt was very important there, mostly as a preservative. The fish that James and Peter and Andrew and others caught, they were salted to preserve themselves. Salt was even used as money. You know, we have this saying, you're not worth your salt. And that meant you're not worth the wage that was paid to you in salt. Salt is binary. That's an interesting chemical fact about salt. Salt is either good or bad. There's no in-between with salt. Worthless salt is thrown away, used on the roadway, not to melt ice, but to become part of the road bed. So when Jesus tells us that we are the salt of the earth, he is telling us that we are to be a preserving factor. Well, is he really telling us that? Is he really telling us that we need to be a preserving factor and never allow any kind of change at all in our religious lives? Is that what Jesus is really telling us? That we must always, always, always preserve what was? Doing church the way church has always been done? Well, you know, the church and individual Christians have sometimes taken this passage to mean that. The church has sometimes seen its mission as preserving all the traditions of the faith in spite of the reality of the changing world and the changing understanding of how we live in the world. To preserve the status quo is not what Jesus said. No. When Jesus said, you are the salt of the earth, he meant that we were to bring, through our relationships, through our commitments, through our willingness to be empowered by Jesus, a special seasoning to the world. A seasoning of love, grace, justice, peace. A seasoning that includes all the fruits of the Spirit. You remember the passage from Galatians 5:22-23 where Paul writes, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. The same thing applies to the statement concerning light. We as Christians are not to spread darkness. We are not to embrace the darkness. We are not to encourage the darkness. We are light. We are not weak little candles. We are not soft little nightlights. We are not dim bulbs. But we are powerful lights. We light up a city on a hill that people from all around can see as a place of safety and light and hope. When Jesus is calling us to be light and salt, Jesus is calling us to a specific spiritual discipline. It's a specific spiritual discipline. Mother Teresa told the world, if you want a love message to be heard, it has got to be sent out. To keep a lamp burning, we have to keep putting oil in it. That's part of the spiritual discipline. To keep at prayer and Bible study and mission. To keep a lamp burning, you have to put oil in it. To be salt and light is not an unintentional thing. It is not a sometimes thing. To be light and salt is something that we do every day and in every situation, and we do it as Christians with intention. The question is today, are you willing to hear the Master's words and to accept the designations which he has laid upon us? Are you able? Are you willing? Are you ready to be salt and light? If you and I are not salt and light, then we are declared to be worthless. Or we are declared to be hiding. Not things that we want. Not things that we want. Two everyday items. Two items that people knew about all the time. Two items that people valued. Salt and light. Jesus grabs hold of them in the Sermon on the Mount and turns them for his own purposes. Two everyday items that are blessed by Jesus that we might be empowered to spread his word. So, how are we salt and light? A very simple example. I hope all of you were as appalled as I was to read about what happened in Salt Lake City in the school system. In one of the schools, a lunch worker took away lunches from kids whose parents still owed money on their lunch account. Took the lunches away, threw the lunches away, and gave the kids milk and apples. It's a horrible thing. And in some cases, the parents didn't actually owe money. There had been an accounting mistake. Horribly, horrible, embarrassing thing. And some people are losing their jobs over it, according to the newspaper, which is sad too. Now, down around our southern states, a gentleman who is a mentor and a tutor in one of the school districts down there read about it, and he began to think about what was going on in his school district, the school district that he worked in, the school district that employed him as a tutor and a mentor for troubled kids. And so he called up the superintendent and found out that yes, that was a similar policy there, that the kids, if they couldn't afford the lunches, if the parents hadn't paid the bills, that they would get a cheese sandwich and a glass of milk, and that's what they would get for lunch. Now we're talking about a lunch that costs 43 cents a day. You know what this fellow did? Found out that about $500 was owed throughout the system for kids that needed their lunch bills paid. $500. So he went in and he wrote a check. And he took care. Because he said, no child should be hungry in school. Simple thing, maybe. Maybe. But he was salt and light. He was salt and light. Now, that doesn't solve the problem forever, you know, but at least it helps for a little while. At least it helps for a little while. What kind of seasoning are we? The choice has to be made. The question has to be answered. What kind of seasoning are we? What kind of light are we? I like the Message, Eugene Peterson's translation of the Bible. Hear how he renders this passage as we close. Let me tell you why you are here. You are here to be salt, seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. If you lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? You've lost your usefulness and will end up in the garbage. Here's another way to put it. You are here to be light,